This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in rural Pennsylvania, where faith became a weapon and devotion turned deadly. On the night of November 14, 1897, in the isolated mountain community of Ashford Hollow, 37 men, women and children entered the small wooden chapel of St. Sebastian for what their pastor, Father Thomas Reichman, called the final congregation. By dawn, the chapel doors had been sealed from the inside with iron nails and wooden planks. Smoke rose from the building for 3 days before authorities could break through. What they found inside would haunt investigators for generations. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like on this video. This case deserves to be remembered, and your support helps bring forgotten stories like this back into the light. Now let us enter Ashford Hollow in the autumn of 1897. Ashford Hollow was not marked on most maps of Pennsylvania in 1897. Nestled deep in the Allegheny Mountains, approximately 40 miles northwest of what is now State College, the settlement consisted of 23 families who had migrated from Bavaria between 1871 and 1873. According to census records preserved in the Pennsylvania State Archives, the population numbered exactly 142 souls by November of 1897. The community lived in deliberate isolation. Documents from the Bavarian Immigration Society of Philadelphia indicate that these families followed a strict interpretation of Catholic doctrine that had fallen out of favor in their homeland. They built their own chapel in 1874, a modest structure of pine and oak, measuring 30 feet by 40 feet, with a small bell tower that could be heard echoing through the mountain valleys. Father Thomas Reichman arrived in Ashford Hollow in January 1891. Parish records from the Diocese of Pittsburgh, discovered in 1964 by historian Dr. Margaret Holloway, show that Reichman had been removed from 3 previous assignments due to what church authorities termed theological irregularities and excessive mysticism. The diocese had effectively exiled him to this remote congregation where his unorthodox sermons would cause minimal scandal. For 6 years, life in Ashford Hollow followed the rhythms of subsistence farming and rigid religious observance. Then, in October 1897, something changed. Letters written by Anna Brenner to her sister in Philadelphia, now housed at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, describe Father Reichman's increasingly disturbing behavior. He preached about the coming darkness and the need for ultimate sacrifice. On November 14, 1897, 37 members of the community entered St. Sebastian Chapel for evening services. By the following morning, the doors were sealed. 3 days later, when the smoke finally stopped rising from the building's windows, 34 bodies were discovered inside. 3 survived. Their testimonies would raise more questions than answers. The events of November 14, 1897, can be reconstructed from multiple sources. The testimonies of the 3 survivors, the investigation report filed by Sheriff William Garrett of Center County, the observations of Dr. Edmund Price, who examined the bodies, and the journals of Father Reichman himself, which were recovered from the chapel ruins. According to the testimony of Elizabeth Kohler, age 19, recorded on November 21, 1897, and preserved in the Center County Criminal Court archives, the evening began unremarkably. The congregation gathered at 6 o'clock as the sun set behind the mountains. The chapel's interior was lit by oil lamps and candles. Father Reichman stood at the simple wooden altar, his face described by Kohler as peaceful, almost joyful. The service began with hymns. Anna Brenner's final letter to her sister, written hours before the service and discovered in her home after the incident, mentions that Father Reichman had asked the congregation to bring enough food and water for a long night of prayer and contemplation. Many families brought blankets and pillows, suggesting they expected an extended service. What happened next remains disputed. Elizabeth Kohler testified that Father Reichman's sermon began normally, focusing on the Passion of Christ and the meaning of sacrifice. But approximately 1 hour into the service, his tone shifted. According to Kohler, Reichman began speaking about the contamination of the outside world, and the need to preserve purity through separation. The second survivor, Carl Brenner, age 16, provided a more disturbing account to Sheriff Garrett, on November 19, 1897. According to documents preserved in the Pennsylvania State Police Historical Archive, Brenner stated that Father Reichmann told the congregation that, "Tonight is the night we prove our devotion." He then directed several men, including Brenner's father Josef and two other farmers named Heinrich Müller and Friedrich Weber, to nail the chapel doors shut from the inside. The third survivor, young Martha Kohler, age 7, was too traumatized to provide coherent testimony. Dr. Edmund Price's medical report, dated November 18, 1897, notes that the child was in a state of profound psychological shock, unresponsive to questions, with evidence of severe dehydration and smoke inhalation. Sheriff Garrett's initial report, filed on November 17, 1897, describes what authorities discovered when they finally broke through the barricaded doors. The bodies were arranged in concentric circles around the altar. Father Reichmann lay at the center, his arms spread wide. The investigation noted that multiple fires had been deliberately set inside the chapel using lamp oil, but these fires had burned themselves out before consuming the entire structure. The autopsy reports prepared by Dr. Price raised disturbing questions. According to documents examined by Dr. Margaret Holloway in her 1965 doctoral dissertation, Religious Extremism in Rural Pennsylvania, the Ashford Hollow Incident, the majority of victims showed no signs of attempting to escape. There was no damage to the sealed doors from the inside. No bodies were found pressed against windows or exits. Instead, they appeared to have remained in their positions as smoke filled the building. 9 victims, however, showed different pathology. Dr. Price's reports indicate evidence of manual strangulation. 5 were children under the age of 10. The physician noted distinctive bruising patterns consistent with adult hands around the throats of victims. These reports were suppressed by county authorities and only came to light when Holloway discovered them in a sealed file in 1964. Father Reichmann's journal provides the most chilling evidence. Written in German, the final entries were translated by Professor Hans Dietrich of Penn State University in 1966. The translations are preserved in the university's Special Collections Library. The entry dated November 12, 1897, 2 days before the incident, reads, "The dreams have become unbearable. Every night I see them standing outside the chapel, waiting. They wear faces I recognize but cannot name. They speak in voices that sound like wind through dead trees. They tell me that this world is ending, that only the pure will be preserved, that I must act before the darkness spreads further. November 13th. I have made my decision. Tomorrow night we will seal ourselves away from the contamination. Some will not understand. Some will resist. But I have been chosen to lead them to salvation. Tonight is the night we have been preparing for, even if they do not yet know it." The final entry, dated November 14th and apparently written hours before the service, consists of a single line repeated 47 times, "Tonight is the night." The survivor's escape adds another layer of mystery. Elizabeth Kohler testified that approximately 3 hours into the ordeal, as smoke began filling the chapel, she grabbed young Martha and ran toward a small window near the rear of the building. Carl Brenner followed them. According to Kohler's testimony, the window, which was normally too small for an adult to pass through, seemed larger somehow, as if the building itself wanted us to leave. All 3 survivors reported a similar phenomenon. As they fled into the forest surrounding the chapel, they heard singing continuing inside the burning building. Not screaming, singing. The hymn, they all agreed, was Heilig, 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 a traditional German hymn praising the Holy Trinity. When Sheriff Garrett and his deputies arrived at approximately 10 o'clock on the morning of November 15th, responding to reports of smoke from a hunter who had seen the plume from a distant ridge, they found the 3 survivors huddled in a barn half a mile from the chapel. The children could not speak. Elizabeth Kohler repeated only one phrase. "He said tonight was the night." The sealed doors required 3 men with axes, 20 minutes to break through. The scene inside defied immediate explanation. According to testimony given by Deputy James Morton to the county coroner on November 20th, 1897, the bodies showed no signs of panic. They lay in patterns, almost like they had been arranged, The priest was smiling. Most disturbing was what investigators found written on the chapel walls. Using what Dr. Price's report identified as a mixture of lamp oil and blood, someone had written the same phrase repeatedly in German around the interior perimeter of the building. Wir sind rein, wir sind bewahrt. Heute Nacht ist die Nacht. Translation: We are pure, we are preserved. Tonight is the night. Handwriting analysis, conducted in 1966 by document examiner Patricia Kowalski as part of Dr. Holloway's research, determined that the writing matched Father Reichmann's script. But according to the position of his body and the rigor mortis timeline established by Dr. Price, Reichmann had been dead for hours before the fires started. The writing, the analysis suggested, had been completed while the victims were still alive and conscious. The chapel burned completely 3 days later. According to newspaper accounts in the Center Daily Times from November 19, 1897, despite the best efforts of volunteers, the building was consumed by a second, more intense fire of unknown origin. The stone foundation was all that remained. The official investigation into what newspapers began calling the Ashford Hollow tragedy commenced on November 16, 1897, under the jurisdiction of Sheriff William Garrett. Documents preserved in the Center County Courthouse reveal an investigation plagued by inconsistencies, missing evidence, and testimonies that contradicted physical facts. Sheriff Garrett's initial approach was methodical. According to his daily log, maintained in a leather-bound notebook now housed at the Pennsylvania State Police Museum in Harrisburg, he interviewed the 3 survivors separately on November 16th, 17th, and 18th. The discrepancies in their accounts troubled him immediately. Elizabeth Kohler stated that the service lasted perhaps 3 hours before she escaped. Carl Brenner estimated no more than 2 hours. Yet when Dr. Edmund Price examined the bodies on November 17th, his report noted that rigor mortis patterns suggested the victims had been dead for a minimum of 48 hours, possibly longer. This timeline was impossible. Multiple witnesses, including farmer Jacob Steinman, who lived 3 miles from the chapel, testified to seeing lamplight in the chapel windows on the evening of November 14th. Dr. Price himself expressed confusion in a letter to his colleague, Dr. Samuel Whitmore at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, dated November 23, 1897. The letter, discovered in the Whitmore family papers in 1978 by medical historian Dr. Rachel Chen, reveals Price's private doubts. The physical evidence suggests these people died days before the survivors claim to have escaped. Yet I examined Elizabeth Kohler within hours of her emergence from the forest. She bore fresh smoke damage to her lungs. She had inhaled smoke within the past 12 hours, not 3 days prior. The bodies tell one story. The survivors tell another. Both cannot be true, yet both are supported by evidence. The investigation faced additional complications. On November 18th, Sheriff Garrett ordered deputies to seal Father Reichmann's residence, a small cabin approximately 200 yards from the chapel. The inventory of items removed from the cabin, preserved in evidence logs at the Center County Archives, includes 347 pages of handwritten journals, 23 religious texts in German and Latin, 1 wooden crucifix with unusual markings, and a collection of 67 letters addressed to various members of the congregation. These letters were never made public during the initial investigation. According to Sheriff Garrett's private notes, reviewed by criminologist Dr. Robert Hayes for his 1982 book, Rural Crime in 19th Century Pennsylvania, the letters contained predictions of death dates for specific individuals, all of which proved accurate within a span of 3 days. Garrett noted that he found this too disturbing to include in official reports. The physical evidence from the chapel itself presented further mysteries. When the Center County coroner, Dr. Harrison Blake, conducted his official examination of the scene on November 17th, he documented several anomalies in his report filed November 19, 1897. First, the pattern of smoke damage was inconsistent. The walls showed heavy smoke staining near the ceiling as expected. However, Dr. Blake noted that the lower 3 feet of all walls showed no smoke damage whatsoever, as if the smoke had refused to settle, or as if the bodies had been arranged after the fires had burned themselves out. Second, The arrangement of bodies defied explanation. Blake's diagram, preserved in the coroner's files, shows the victims positioned in 3 concentric circles. The outer circle contained 21 adults. The middle circle held 9 children. At the center, surrounding Father Reichmann, were 3 men whom survivors identified as Heinrich Müller, Friedrich Weber, and Josef Brenner, the same men who had nailed the doors shut. Most troubling was the condition of these 3 central bodies. According to Blake's autopsy reports, all 3 showed signs of having been strangled before the fires began. The marks around their throats suggested thin cord or wire applied with extreme force. No such cord or wire was found in the chapel ruins. The investigation took a darker turn when Sheriff Garrett attempted to interview other members of the Ashford Hollow community who had not attended the service. According to records maintained by the Diocese of Pittsburgh, 16 families lived in the settlement. If 37 people attended the service, where were the others? Deputy James Morton's canvassing report, dated November 20, 1897, provides a disturbing answer. Of the remaining community members, Morton found 11 families had abandoned their homes between November 10th and November 13th, just days before the incident. Belongings remained in place. Food sat on tables. Livestock wandered untended. According to Morton's testimony to a county magistrate on November 22nd, it appeared these people left in haste, taking nothing but the clothes they wore. One family, the Steinmanns, remained. Jacob Steinmann, his wife Greta, and their 4 children had not attended the final service. When Deputy Morton interviewed Steinmann on November 20th, the farmer's testimony, preserved in court records, provided chilling context. Steinmann stated that Father Reichmann had visited his home on November 13th, the day before the incident. According to Steinmann, "The priest told me that I was not ready. He said my faith was weak. He said only the pure would attend the final congregation. I was grateful my faith was weak, after seeing what became of the pure." Steinmann also testified that on the night of November 14th, he heard the chapel bells ringing at irregular intervals between 8 o'clock and midnight. Sheriff Garrett's report notes this as significant because the 3 survivors all stated the bells never rang during the service. Yet Steinmann, 3 miles away, heard them clearly. More disturbing was Steinmann's account of the following days. He testified that on November 15th, as smoke rose from the chapel, he approached to within 100 yards of the building. He observed figures moving past the windows, shadows of people walking inside. Yet by this time, according to Dr. Price's timeline, everyone inside had been dead for at least 24 hours. The newspaper coverage of the incident reveals how quickly authorities moved to control the narrative. The Center Daily Times published its first report on November 18, 1897. The article, written by editor Thomas Cunningham, described the incident as a tragic fire resulting from overturned lamps during a religious service that lasted too long into the night. No mention was made of the sealed doors. No mention of the strangulation victims. No mention of the writings on the walls. Dr. Margaret Holloway's 1965 analysis of newspaper coverage identified a clear pattern of official suppression, with later articles becoming increasingly vague about details. By November 25th, the Center Daily Times published a final article stating that the unfortunate incident at Ashford Hollow has been fully investigated and determined to be an accidental tragedy born of religious enthusiasm and carelessness with open flames. The article announced that the surviving residents of Ashford Hollow, including the 3 survivors of the chapel incident, were being relocated to various communities where they might begin anew. This relocation happened with remarkable speed. Records from the Diocese of Pittsburgh show that by December 1, 1897, just 17 days after the incident, every remaining resident of Ashford Hollow had been dispersed to communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York. The Steinmann family was sent to Erie. Elizabeth Kohler and her sister were placed with relatives in Scranton. Carl Brenner went to Pittsburgh. Young Martha Kohler was committed to the Western Pennsylvania Asylum for the Insane. Sheriff Garrett filed his final report on December 3, 1897. The document, running to just 4 pages, concluded that Father Thomas Reichmann, suffering from religious mania brought on by isolation and possibly disease, convinced his congregation to participate in a prolonged prayer vigil. Overcome by smoke from inadequately ventilated oil lamps, the congregation succumbed to asphyxiation. The doors were sealed as part of a religious ritual. The 3 survivors escaped through quick thinking and fortune. No criminal charges are warranted as the primary responsible party, Father Reichmann, perished in the incident. The case was officially closed. The ruins of St. Sebastian Chapel were bulldozed in March 1898. The land was purchased by a timber company and logged heavily over the following decade. By 1910, no physical trace of Ashford Hollow remained. The case would have remained forgotten, buried in county archives, if not for the work of one determined researcher 67 years later. Dr. Margaret Holloway first encountered the Ashford Hollow case in the spring of 1964 while researching her doctoral dissertation at Penn State University. Holloway, aged 28, was investigating patterns of religious extremism in rural Pennsylvania communities during the late 19th century. A footnote in a 1923 regional history book mentioned an unfortunate religious tragedy near State College in 1897. Intrigued by the vague description, Holloway began searching for primary sources. According to her research journal, maintained throughout her investigation and now preserved in the Penn State University Special Collections, Holloway's first breakthrough came on April 14, 1964, when she discovered Sheriff Garrett's original case file in a storage room at the Center County Courthouse. The file had been misfiled under Accidental Deaths 1897 rather than Criminal Investigations. Reading through the documents, Holloway immediately recognized inconsistencies between the official conclusions and the evidence documented within the file itself. Her journal entry from that day notes, "The official report describes an accident. The evidence describes something far more deliberate and far more disturbing. Someone wanted this investigation to end quickly. The question is why?" Over the following 6 months, Holloway conducted extensive archival research. She located Dr. Price's autopsy reports, the coroner's findings, Deputy Morton's canvassing reports, and most significantly, the suppressed evidence that Sheriff Garrett had excluded from his final report. Her dissertation, completed in December 1964, presented a detailed reconstruction of the incident that challenged the official narrative. However, it was Holloway's continued research after completing her doctorate that uncovered the most disturbing elements of the case. In January 1965, now working as an assistant professor of history at Penn State, Holloway began attempting to trace what had happened to the survivors and the other residents of Ashford Hollow after their relocation in December 1897. The findings, documented in her research files and later summarized in an unpublished manuscript titled The Ashford Hollow Aftermath 1897-1965, revealed a pattern of tragedy that seemed to follow those who had escaped. Elizabeth Kohler lived with her married sister in Scranton from December 1897 until her death on November 14, 1899, exactly 2 years after the chapel incident. According to death records from Lackawanna County, Kohler was found in her locked bedroom, dead from what the coroner ruled self-inflicted wounds to the throat. She was 21 years old. Letters discovered in her room, mentioned in the death investigation report, contained repeated phrases about seeing them at the windows and hearing the bells at night. Carl Brenner relocated to Pittsburgh and found work at a steel mill. According to employment records from Carnegie Steel Company, discovered by Holloway in 1965, Brenner worked there from January 1898 until November 1900. On November 14, 1900, 3 years to the day after the Ashford Hollow incident, Brenner failed to report for his shift. His body was found in his boarding house room that evening. The death certificate filed with Allegheny County listed cause of death as asphyxiation by smoke inhalation. No fire was found in his room or building. Young Martha Kohler remained institutionalized at the Western Pennsylvania Asylum until her death on November 14, 1904, 7 years after the incident. She was 14 years old. According to asylum records examined by Holloway, Martha never recovered her ability to speak. However, Staff notes indicate that every year on November 14th, she would become extremely agitated, attempting to seal the door to her room and covering the window with her blanket. The pattern extended to others who had been in Ashford Hollow during that period. Jacob Steinman, the farmer who had witnessed the smoke and heard the bells, died on November 14, 1905, in Erie, Pennsylvania. His death certificate listed heart failure, but a local newspaper article about his death, discovered by Holloway in the Erie Daily Times archives, mentioned that Steinman had become obsessed in recent days with boarding up his windows and refused to allow his family to light lamps after sunset. Holloway's research revealed that of the 16 people who had been living in Ashford Hollow but had not entered the chapel, 14 died between 1899 and 1910. 12 of these deaths occurred on November 14th of various years. The causes varied: accidents, apparent suicides, sudden illnesses, but the date remained constant. In March 1965, Holloway made contact with one of the only 2 survivors still living, Father Reichmann's successor, Father Emil Koch, who had been sent to assess the abandoned settlement in January 1898. Now 89 years old and living in a retirement home in Philadelphia, Koch agreed to meet with Holloway on March 18, 1965. According to Holloway's interview notes from that meeting, Koch's testimony added new dimensions to the case. The elderly priest explained that he had spent 3 days in Ashford Hollow, staying in one of the abandoned homes while surveying the ruins of the chapel. On his second night, November 14, 1898, exactly 1 year after the incident, Koch reported experiencing what he described as a vision or perhaps a visitation. Holloway's notes record Koch's testimony. "I was awakened by singing, hymns in German, coming from the direction of where the chapel had stood. I went to the window and saw lights in that direction, as if the building still stood and lamps burned within. I could see shadows moving. I heard a bell ringing, and then I heard a voice, clear as if someone stood beside me, saying, 'Tonight is the night.' I left at dawn and reported to the diocese that the site should be consecrated and sealed. They thought me foolish." Koch also revealed that he had been part of the church tribunal that had investigated Father Reichmann in 1890 before Reichmann's assignment to Ashford Hollow. According to Koch, Reichmann had been removed from his previous parish in Altoona, Pennsylvania, because he had become obsessed with visions of a coming darkness and the need to preserve the pure in faith. The tribunal had concluded that Reichmann was mentally unstable but not dangerous. Koch's testimony to Holloway included a disturbing detail. Father Reichmann claimed he had been contacted by something he called the Congregation Beyond the Veil. He said they appeared to him in dreams and told him that one day he would need to seal the faithful away to protect them from contamination. We dismissed this as delusional. Perhaps we were wrong to dismiss it. Father Koch died on November 14, 1965, 8 months after his interview with Holloway. His death, according to records from the Philadelphia Medical Examiner, was attributed to natural causes associated with advanced age. However, the attending physician's notes, which Holloway obtained in 1966, mentioned that Koch had been found in his room with the door locked from inside and cloth stuffed into the gaps around the doorframe and window. His final words to the facility's night nurse were reported as, "Tonight is the night." Disturbed by this pattern but determined to complete her research, Holloway made a decision that would define the remainder of her academic career and ultimately her life. In June 1965, she traveled to the site of the former Ashford Hollow settlement. The location was not easy to find. The area had been heavily logged and had reverted to second-growth forest. No roads led directly to the site. Using historical maps and surveyor records, Holloway hiked approximately 6 miles into the mountains from the nearest Forest Service road, accompanied by her research assistant, a graduate student named David Chen. Holloway's field notes from June 19, 1965, describe finding the stone foundation of the chapel still visible beneath decades of leaf litter and undergrowth. She and Chen spent 2 days excavating and documenting the site, taking photographs and collecting artifacts. Among the items Holloway discovered were fragments of the chapel's bell, metal lamp fixtures, and most significantly, a metal lockbox buried beneath what would have been the altar. The box, she noted, was sealed with a padlock, but had rusted sufficiently that it could be forced open. Inside, Holloway found documents that would transform her understanding of the case. According to her detailed inventory, dated June 20th, 1965, the box contained 43 pages of Father Reichmann's handwritten journal entries, separate from those recovered in 1897. A ledger listing the names of all congregation members, with dates written next to each name. 17 letters, all addressed to Father Reichmann from someone identifying themselves only as C. Wendt. A collection of 53 photographs showing the congregation members in various poses, many taken inside the chapel. The journal entries were the most revealing. Written between October 1st and November 13th, 1897, they documented Reichmann's growing conviction that he was receiving instructions from what he called those who have gone beyond the veil. According to Holloway's translation, completed with the help of Professor Hans Dietrich, in July 1965, Reichmann wrote extensively about seeing the faces at the windows after dark and hearing voices that came from inside the walls. One entry, dated November 3rd, 1897, reads, "They tell me the time is coming soon. They show me visions of what will happen if we do not seal ourselves away. The darkness is spreading. It takes the form of ordinary things, a neighbor's smile, a child's laughter, the sound of wind in trees. But beneath these forms is something that consumes. Only by withdrawing completely, by making ourselves pure and separate, can we preserve what is holy. They tell me I must be willing to do what is necessary. Tonight is coming." The ledger was even more disturbing. Next to each congregation member's name, Reichmann had written a date. For the 34 who died in the chapel, the date listed was November 14th, 1897. For the 3 who survived, dates were listed between 1899 and 1904. For those who had left the settlement before the incident, dates ranged from 1899 to 1910. Holloway cross-referenced these dates with death records. According to her analysis, completed in August 1965, 27 of the 30 dates matched actual death dates exactly. 6 others were close, within 3 to 5 days. Only 4 showed no correlation, but Holloway noted that she could not locate death records for these individuals, and they might have died unreported. The letters from C. Wendt presented another mystery. Written in German between September and November 1897, they appeared to be responses to letters from Reichmann. The content suggested that Wendt was either a former colleague or mentor. The letters discussed theological concepts, but took on an increasingly unusual tone. The letter dated November 9, 1897, written just 5 days before the incident, contained this passage. "You are correct to act soon. I too have seen them. They appear each night at exactly 9 o'clock. They stand outside my window and they wait. They never speak, but I know what they want. They want admission. They want to enter. By sealing the doors, you prevent their entry. By making the sacrifice, you ensure purity. Remember, tonight is the night, but the night never ends for those who are preserved." Holloway attempted to identify C. Wendt through church records and immigration documents. According to her research notes from September 1965, she discovered that a Father Cornelius Wendt had served a parish in Bavaria and had emigrated to the United States in 1870. Wendt had been assigned to a church in Reading, Pennsylvania, approximately 100 miles southeast of Ashford Hollow. Records from the Diocese of Philadelphia indicated that Father Wendt's church, St. Mary's, had burned in November 1897. According to newspaper accounts from the Reading Eagle, the fire occurred on November 14th, 1897, the same night as the Ashford Hollow incident. Father Wendt and 18 parishioners died in the blaze. The church doors had been found sealed from the inside. Holloway's discovery of this parallel incident opened new questions. Had there been coordination between Reichmann and Wendt? Were there other similar incidents that had gone unrecorded or been dismissed as accidents? Her research notes from October 1965 indicate she had begun searching archives across Pennsylvania, looking for church fires or religious tragedies on or around November 14th in various years. She found 6 possible cases between 1897 and 1920. Each involved small, isolated religious communities. Each involved sealed buildings. Each occurred on November 14th. Holloway began preparing a manuscript that would document all of these cases and argue for a pattern of religiously motivated mass deaths that had been systematically suppressed by both civil and church authorities. That manuscript was never completed. On November 10, 1965, Holloway informed her department chair at Penn State that she would be returning to the Ashford Hollow site to conduct additional excavations. She planned to go alone this time, as her research assistant David Chen had graduated and taken a position at another university. Colleagues urged her to wait until spring, but Holloway's journal entries from that week reveal her urgency. "I need to be there on the anniversary. I believe something happens on that date. The evidence suggests the phenomenon, whatever it is, remains active." Holloway departed State College on November 12, 1965. She told her neighbor she would return by November 16th. When she failed to return, a missing person report was filed on November 18th. A search party organized by the Center County Sheriff's Department located her campsite on November 21st, approximately 100 yards from the chapel foundation. The police report, filed by Deputy Samuel Morrison and preserved in the Pennsylvania State Police Archives, describes finding Holloway's tent intact, her research materials carefully organized inside, her camping equipment unused. Her sleeping bag showed no signs of having been slept in. According to the report, it appeared Dr. Holloway had set up camp and then immediately departed, leaving everything behind. A wider search of the area continued for 3 weeks. No trace of Margaret Holloway was ever found. The case remained officially open as a missing person investigation until 1975, when she was declared legally dead. However, the investigation report includes one detail that searchers found disturbing. On a stone near the chapel foundation, someone had scratched the words, "Tonight is the night." Analysis of the scratches indicated they had been made recently, possibly within days of Holloway's disappearance. The handwriting was consistent with samples of Holloway's penmanship. The disappearance of Dr. Margaret Holloway in 1965 effectively ended academic investigation into the Ashford Hollow incident for nearly 2 decades. Her research materials, recovered from her campsite, were placed in the Penn State University Special Collections, where they remained largely unexamined until 1983. That year, a forest ranger named Thomas Garrett, grandson of Sheriff William Garrett, who had investigated the original 1897 incident, reported a series of unusual occurrences in the area that once comprised Ashford Hollow. His reports, filed with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry and obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests by journalist Sandra Myers in 1991, document phenomena that eerily paralleled accounts from nearly a century earlier. Garrett's first report, dated November 15, 1983, describes responding to what he believed was an illegal campfire in the restricted forestry zone. According to his statement, preserved in Pennsylvania State Forest Incident Reports, he observed a glow consistent with lamplight or firelight coming from the area near the former chapel site on the evening of November 14, 1983. When he hiked to the location at dawn on November 15th, he found no evidence of any fire, no campers, and no disturbance to the forest floor. What he did find troubled him. According to his report, "At the site of the old foundation, I discovered fresh scratch marks on several stones. The marks formed words in what appeared to be German. I photographed these marks. Also present were 37 stones arranged in 3 concentric circles around the foundation's center, exactly where the altar would have been located according to historical maps. These stones were not present during my previous patrol of this area on October 28th. The photographs Garrett submitted with his report show the stone arrangements clearly. Analysis conducted by archaeologist Dr. Patricia Chen at the University of Pittsburgh in 1984 confirmed that the stones had been recently moved and deliberately positioned. The arrangement matched precisely the pattern of bodies documented in the 1897 coroner's report. The scratched words, translated by Professor Klaus Werner of Penn State's German department, read, "Wir warten hier. We wait here." Garrett filed additional reports in subsequent years. On November 14, 1984, he again observed lights in the area. His report from November 15, 1984 states, "At approximately 8:47 p.m. on 11/14/84, while conducting patrol approximately 1 mile from the chapel site, I heard what sounded like a church bell ringing. The sound came from the direction of the old settlement. I proceeded to investigate. As I approached, I heard singing, hymns in German, multiple voices. When I reached the foundation site at approximately 9:15 p.m., the sounds ceased immediately. The site was empty. Temperature at the time was 34 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath was visible. However, I observed no breath vapor or body heat signatures in the area where the sounds had originated." In his report filed November 16, 1985, Garrett documented something more disturbing. He had decided to camp within sight of the chapel foundation on the night of November 14th, determined to observe whatever phenomenon was occurring. His detailed account describes the following. "At 8:30 p.m., I observed a light source appearing to emanate from the foundation area, though no actual fire or lamp was present. The light increased in intensity over approximately 20 minutes. At 8:51 p.m., I heard singing begin. The voices were clear, at least 30 distinct voices singing Heilig, Heilig, Heilig in German. I approached to within approximately 50 feet of the foundation. I could see shadows moving within the light, human-shaped figures that appeared to be standing in circular arrangements. I called out, identifying myself as a forest ranger. The singing stopped immediately, the lights extinguished. I turned on my flashlight and approached the foundation. No one was present. The ground showed no footprints except my own. I returned to my camp and maintained observation until dawn. No further phenomena occurred." Garrett's supervisor, District Ranger Michael Patterson, noted in his review of these reports that Ranger Garrett was a reliable and experienced officer with no history of filing false or exaggerated reports. However, Patterson also noted that, without corroborating witnesses or physical evidence, these observations must be classified as unexplained natural phenomena rather than evidence of paranormal activity. The phenomena were not limited to forest rangers. In October 1986, a group of hikers from Ohio State University's Outdoor Recreation Club requested permission to camp in the area as part of a weekend hiking trip. The group of 12 students and 2 faculty advisors were granted a permit for November 13th or 15th, 1986, according to the incident report filed by faculty advisor Dr. James Reynolds on November 17, 1986, and preserved in the Pennsylvania State Forest Archives. The group established camp approximately 2 miles from the chapel site on the afternoon of November 13th. On November 14th, 3 students asked permission to hike to what they called the old church ruins they had read about in a historical guidebook. Dr. Reynolds approved the day hike. The students, Jennifer Matthews, age 20, Scott Davidson, age 21, and Marie Chen, age 19, departed at 1 p.m. When the students failed to return by dark, Dr. Reynolds organized a search party. Using the historical maps, the group located the chapel foundation at approximately 9:30 p.m. According to Reynolds' report, we found all 3 students sitting on the ground near the stone foundation. They appeared to be in a state of shock or trance. They were unresponsive to our calls. We physically helped them to their feet and escorted them back to camp. All 3 refused to speak about what had occurred. The following morning, Marie Chen provided a statement to Dr. Reynolds, which he included in his incident report. According to Chen's account, "We reached the old foundation around 3 p.m. We took photographs and explored the area. At approximately 5:30 p.m., as the sun was setting, we heard a bell ringing. We thought maybe there was a church nearby. Then we heard singing, beautiful singing in a foreign language. We saw lights, like lamplight, coming from the ground where the foundation was, and then we saw them." When pressed for details, Chen stated only, "They looked like people. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes. They were standing in circles. They were all looking at us. One of them, a man in black, he looked like a priest. He smiled at us and said something. I don't remember the words. Everything after that is blank until Dr. Reynolds was shaking my shoulder. Jennifer Matthews and Scott Davidson refused to provide any statements. According to Dr. Reynolds, both students withdrew from Ohio State at the end of the fall semester, and he lost contact with them. The incident prompted a more formal investigation. In March 1987, Dr. Robert Hayes, a criminologist and historian who had written about the Ashford Hollow case in his 1982 book, received permission from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry to conduct a scientific investigation of the site. Dr. Hayes assembled a team that included 2 colleagues from Carnegie Mellon University's psychology department, a geologist, and a documentary filmmaker. The team spent 3 days at the site in early November 1987, installing motion-activated cameras and audio recording equipment around the chapel foundation. According to Dr. Hayes's report, published in the Journal of Anomalous Studies in 1988, the equipment recorded unusual phenomena on the night of November 14, 1987. The audio recordings captured what Hayes described as multiple human voices singing in German, consistent with late 19th century hymns, duration approximately 47 minutes, beginning at 8:52 p.m. and ending at 9:39 p.m. Analysis of the recordings by audio forensics specialist Dr. Linda Morrison at George Washington University confirmed that the voices were consistent with human vocal patterns and appeared to be multiple distinct voices, at least 25 to 30 individuals. The motion-activated cameras positioned at 6 locations around the foundation all triggered simultaneously at 8:51 p.m. on November 14th. However, according to Hayes's report, the resulting photographs show only light anomalies, undefined bright areas with no clear shapes or forms. No human figures are visible in any photograph, despite the motion sensors having been triggered. Most disturbing was the experience of the documentary filmmaker, Arthur Rosen, who had been positioned approximately 100 yards from the foundation to capture wide shots of the site. According to Rosen's statement, included in Hayes's report, at approximately 8:50 p.m., I observed lights appearing at the foundation site. Through my camera's telephoto lens, I could see figures, people in old-fashioned clothing, appearing to materialize within the light. I began filming. There were dozens of them. They were arranged in circles, just like the old reports described. In the center was a man in black, clearly a priest. He was looking directly at my position. He raised his hand as if gesturing toward me. I felt an overwhelming compulsion to approach them. I actually took several steps forward before Dr. Hayes grabbed my arm and pulled me back. The moment I looked away from the camera, the phenomena ceased. When I reviewed my footage later, the video showed only lights with no distinct forms. Dr. Hayes's investigation concluded with this assessment. The Ashford Hollow site exhibits recurring phenomena that defy conventional explanation. Whether these phenomena represent some form of residual psychic energy, a dimensional anomaly, or something else entirely remains unknown. What is clear is that something occurs at this location on November 14th of each year. That something appears to be intelligent, interactive, and potentially dangerous. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry responded to Hayes's report by officially closing the area to public access. According to a memorandum from the Bureau dated March 15, 1988, and obtained through FOIA requests, the former Ashford Hollow settlement area is hereby designated as a restricted zone. No camping or hiking permits will be issued for this area. Forest rangers are instructed to patrol the perimeter on November 13th and 15th of each year to ensure compliance. However, the phenomena have not remained contained to the anniversary date. In 1992, Forest Ranger Sarah Mitchell reported finding the stone circle arrangement at the foundation site in July, months away from November. Her report, dated July 18, 1992, noted, "The stones have been rearranged again, but this time there are 38 stones in the circles, not 37. The 38th stone sits outside all 3 circles, approximately 10 feet from the center." Analysis of Mitchell's photographs by Dr. Patricia Chen revealed that the 38th stone had been marked with a name, M. Holloway. In 1995, a geology survey team from the University of Pittsburgh, unaware of the site's history, conducted routine geological mapping in the area as part of a larger study of the Allegheny Mountains. Graduate student Thomas Werner's field notes from November 14, 1995, preserved in the university's Geology Department archives, include this entry. Reached interesting stone foundation at approximately 5:00 p.m. Appears to be remains of old building. While photographing the site at approximately 8:50 p.m., experienced severe disorientation and overwhelming sense of dread. Heard sounds that my mind interpreted as singing, but could not identify source. Return to base camp immediately. Do not wish to return to that location. Werner's advisor, Professor Alan Drake, noted in his review of the field notes, I have supervised Mr. Werner for 3 years. He is a rational, skeptical scientist. His reaction to this site is completely out of character and suggests he experienced something genuinely disturbing. Most recently, in October 2024, the Pennsylvania State Police investigated reports from hunters who claimed to have encountered a group of people in old-fashioned clothing near the former Ashford Hollow site. According to the incident report filed by Trooper James Morrison on October 23, 2024, 3 hunters from Harrisburg reported that while tracking deer on October 20th, they observed approximately 30 individuals dressed in clothing from the 1800s or early 1900s walking in single file through the forest toward an area of stone ruins. When we called out to them, they disappeared. Not ran away, disappeared. One moment they were there, the next moment the forest was empty. Trooper Morrison's investigation found no evidence of historical reenactors or other groups having permits for the area. His report concludes, no rational explanation found for witnesses' account. However, all 3 witnesses were sober, consistent in their statements, and appear credible. The site remains officially closed to public access. The Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry maintains regular patrols. But each November 14th, forest rangers report the same phenomena: lights where no lights should be, singing where no singers can be found, and the unmistakable sound of a chapel bell that was melted in a fire more than 127 years ago. 127 years have passed since Father Thomas Reichmann spoke his final words to the congregation of St. Sebastian Chapel. 37 people entered that small wooden building in the mountains of Pennsylvania on November 14, 1897. 34 never left. The 3 who escaped carried the horror with them until their deaths, all occurring on November 14th of subsequent years. Dr. Margaret Holloway entered those same mountains on November 12, 1965, determined to uncover the truth. She vanished on November 14th. Her final message, scratched into stone, repeated the phrase that has echoed through this case across 3 centuries. Tonight is the night. But the night never ended. The evidence is overwhelming. Whatever Father Reichmann believed he was protecting his congregation from, whatever drove him to seal those doors and light those fires, it remains active. The phenomena recur with clockwork precision. The stones are rearranged, the lights appear, the singing continues. And year by year the circle grows larger. 37 stones became 38. How many stones will there be next November? The official explanation remains unchanged since 1897, religious mania, accidental fire, tragic coincidence. But the forest rangers know better. The researchers who have studied the site know better. The witnesses who have seen the lights and heard the singing know better. If you find yourself in the forests of central Pennsylvania in mid-November, if you see lights in the distance after dark, if you hear singing in German carried on the wind, if you encounter a stone foundation surrounded by carefully arranged stones, leave immediately. Do not investigate. Do not approach. Do not attempt to photograph or record what you see. Because if you hear a voice saying, "Tonight is the night," it might already be too late. The congregation is still gathering. The doors are still sealed. And Father Reichmann is still smiling, waiting for the pure in faith to join him in the chapel that burned but never truly fell. The circle continues to grow.